Good morning. Today we are starting chapter 17, the Cold War and Warm Kitchens. So let's look at our key terms that are going to go with the Cold War and the Warm Kitchens. Our first one is communism. We've heard that word before. We know over in Russia they are communists. We need to know what it means. So communism is an economic system in which property and businesses are owned by the government for the benefit of all citizens. So when you look at just the general definition, you go, well, this doesn't sound so bad. The government is owning stuff, so all the citizens have access to everything. So everybody's kind of the same and treated the same, and we all have everything we need. In reality, it doesn't play out that way. In reality, we're going to find out the negative side to communism. That when you have the government in charge of everything, what happens if the person in charge of the government isn't really truly looking out for the people? The people suffer because the people don't have power over anything. So if you get a dictator in, if you get a leader in who isn't truly looking out for the good of the people, it's going to seriously hurt the people. Colin. Yes. Yes. North Korea is a good example. Russia is another example. There's different pockets of communist countries. It has not come to be the way that it was originally thought it would happen. So the ideas behind it, everybody is treated the same. So we don't have the super rich and the super poor. Because who wants to be on the super poor side? That's not good for anyone. Okay? We don't need to have billions of dollars. That doesn't help people. So what the thought process was when communism first came to be is not how it actually played out, because there are humans in charge and humans aren't always behaving how they should behave. So then we have capitalism. What is the United States?
Capitalist?
Yeah, we are a capitalist country. So let's see what capitalism means. It's an economic system in which property and businesses are privately owned. Is this a perfect system?
No.
Because again, there are humans in charge. So we do have the people who become billionaires. We've got the Bezos, we've got the Elon Musks, we've got these super rich people, and then we have the homeless living on the streets. So it is not perfect. Ideally, it should be the haves take care of the have-nots. So if you are, the more you have, the more responsibility you have to look out for your fellow man. Some people say, oh, you have a lot, take care of me, I don't have to do anything. That's not the way that it should be. It shouldn't be, oh, you have so much, you're going to pay for everything that I have. That's not in reality how it should be. I mean, that is reality, but in theory, that's not how it should be. It should be, hey, we're all going to work, we're all going to try, and we will have people looking out for one another, but we all have to do our part. Doesn't always happen. The people with money don't always do their part because they say, hey, I worked hard for my money, it's mine. I'm not going to share anything. We have people who say, hey, I don't want to do anything, you take care of me. In reality, we all need to do our part to look out for one another, living by those Catholic social teachings. So neither system, communism or capitalism, is perfect, right? But you have to look at which one is better for the most people. Okay. Living in the United States, we live in a capitalist society where we know that if you work really hard, you have a chance of moving up. In a communist society, you're all the same and you're stuck there. There is no, hey, I can get a better job. Maybe I can change my career and do something different. Maybe I can get some pay raises in, work towards something. There's none of that. I'll bring that to Mrs. Gregory. Thank you. So obviously we live in the United States. We're gonna like capitalism better than communism. People in Russia who are used to the communism might say, ooh, our way is better. Your way is scary because look at all the homeless that you have. So they're going to see it from their perspective. We're going to see it from our perspective. And we're going to learn a little bit more about both sides of it. The superpower. We have touched a little bit on the superpowers. People said, well, we were allies with the Soviet Union. And then now we're enemies with Russia. What happened? And I was kind of alluding to, well, we were fighting over who was going to be the biggest superpower. So a superpower is a country with very great political and military power, which may be used to influence the actions of other countries. The superpowers are the leaders of the world. The superpowers will say, hey, you need to stop doing that, and other countries will go, okay, I don't want to make them mad. They have more military than what we have. We don't want to get into a fight with them because we know they're going to win. So the superpowers are the leaders. They're the ones that say, do this, don't do that, and people listen. So what happened was nobody wants to share their power. We don't want to have a bunch of superpowers. We want to be the superpower. We want to be the ultimate. We want to be the biggest superpower of the world. We want people to follow our way, not a different country's way. So we end up in the Cold War, which was the intense political conflict between the United States and the Soviet Union. from 1945, so the end of World War II, all the way to 1991. So was this a war that was being fought with guns? No. Garrison, what do you know about it?
I just know there's a lot of threats in it, but there wasn't any fighting.
Yeah, there was a lot of threats. And a lot of, we're going to do something first. So the race to go to the moon first. Okay? Yes, it was a space race. It was who's going to put a man in space first, who's going to land on the moon first, because you're going to see as a bigger power, you're able to do that. So it's the first. We want to be the first to do everything. Naveen.
Didn't they also want to have like the power to like have like some space, like being able to launch nukes from space and stuff like that?
Yeah, well,
That's why people.
I don't know if they want to launch them from space.
Well, that's more or less why people were worried about like who would win the space race, because that way they have military control over
Yes.
a lot of area.
Yes, so it's the military control of you want to own the air as well as the land. So you want to be able to have that control and power. So yes, that played a part in it. Paul.
Do you know who won the Cold War?
Well, it was the United States versus the Soviet Union. Is there a Soviet Union anymore? The Soviet Union broke down. Putin is trying to, because he was around in 1991. He's older than I am, and I was around in 1991. He remembers what it was like to be this big, mighty superpower. And he's saying, I want to get Russia back to where we used to be. So I don't think the United States is as big of a superpower as we used to be, but we're still pretty powerful in the world. Russia, not nearly as powerful as the Soviet Union was. They really got broken down. So I don't think it was a winning or a losing, but they didn't hold up as well as we did. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it wasn't like a fight where you have somebody who surrenders. It wasn't that kind of war, but they're no longer the Soviet Union. So that kind of tells you something.
When you said like there was a lot of threats,
Mm-hmm.
my dad, he said he remembers when like in school they hid underneath their desks for like the bombs, like from all the bomb threats that the Soviet Union had. They had like the bomb drills.
Your dad remembers doing that, or his parents did that?
My dad, he was born in like 1980, so if it was 1991,
Yeah. Because I can honestly say I never had to practice that. So I would love to talk to your dad about that, about what school he was at where they were still practicing it. That was a big thing in the 1950s,
Okay.
that they would do the hiding under the desk. So maybe your dad remembers a lot of stuff. I really would love to talk to him about that. Because I know my parents talked stories about when they did that when they were little. I never actually had to do that. Maybe it was just the school I was at that we didn't do it. Interesting. But they would do that. They would have bomb shelters just in case if Russia launched or Soviet Union launched their nuclear weapons. They would have bomb shelters that they could hide in. Like nowadays, we do lockdown drills. And what should we do if there's an intruder? And if they're outside the building, if they're inside the building, we need to be prepared. Well, they used to do bomb drills. Just in case a nuclear bomb was dropped, let's hide under our desk. Is that really going to help you from a nuclear bomb?
No, it's not.
No. So now we know it's probably not the smartest thing to do. If a nuclear bomb hits, you don't hide under a desk. You're still going to either be in the blast zone where you're dead right away, or you're going to get that radiation poisoning like we talked about with the atomic bombs we dropped on Japan. Yeah, hiding under a desk is not going to solve anything. But they had to do something to make themselves feel a little bit safer. All right, a veteran is a person who has served in the armed forces especially someone who has fought in a war. Now, my brother was in the army, and he didn't actually go into combat, but there was war going on. The Gulf War was going on when he was in the 1990s. I think it was the Gulf War. There was war going on when he was in the army. So he is considered a veteran, even though he didn't fight in the war. He was ready to go to war in case his unit got called up. So even though you don't fight in the war, you're ready to go to war. So you still need to be honored. A suburb is a community
Yeah, I know what it is.
in an area surrounding an urban city. We are in suburbs of what urban city?
Minneapolis County.
So we are Minneapolis. We are a Minneapolis suburb. St. Paul has its own suburbs. So we would say, you could say we're a Twin Cities suburb, but technically we're on the Minneapolis side. So we would be a Minneapolis suburb. Okay, and then if you were over in Maplewood or White Bear Lake, that's over on the other side by St. Paul. So those would be the St. Paul suburbs. So most big metropolises only have one big city. We're unique that we have two big cities right next to each other because we're the Twin Cities. Usually like Chicago, Mr. Gambino's family lives in a suburb of Chicago. It's not usually confusing as to which city you're a suburb of, but in the Twin Cities, if you're on the western side, you're a suburb of Minneapolis. If you're on the eastern side, you'd be a suburb of St. Paul. Colin,
What side is on
Minneapolis. We talked a little bit about suburbs before, how it's suburban. Okay. After World War II, there's a big rise in the suburbs. People moving out of the crowded cities because they wanted lawns, they wanted space, they wanted a little bit more peace and quiet than what you get in the cities. So we see a big increase in the suburbs during this time period. So we're going to be reading about a big chunk of time from 1945 to 1991. That's a long time. So we're going to learn about what was going on in America and in Minnesota specifically. We have the Vietnam War is a military conflict. Bless you. And that was from 1954 to 1975. So we first started, it was small in 1954. It started out small and then it got bigger. So in the 60s and the beginning of the 70s is when it got really big. And it was between communist forces in North Vietnam and non-communist forces in South Vietnam. Which side do you think the United States went over to fight on?
North Vietnam. So we were on their side, but they fought South Vietnam.
So we were fighting for South Vietnam. United States sided with South Vietnam because they were non-communist. Who sided with North Vietnam? Ethan? The Soviet Union. Okay, so the Soviet Union was fighting on North Vietnam side. The United States was fighting with South Vietnam. We were fighting against the communist forces. Did we win the Vietnamese War?
No.
No.
It's all North Vietnam.
So, what?
It's all North Vietnam.
Yep. We had to end up pulling out without actually winning. And Vietnam's a really small country compared to the United States. But they had, it was different. We're used to European countries and United States and what the landscape is like there. What is the landscape like in Vietnam, Tristan?
It's all like jungle.
It's all jungle, which is a very, very different style of fighting. Okay, there's a lot of ambushes that can happen. Yep, there's a lot of guerrilla warfare. And what ended up happening was soldiers didn't know which side somebody was on. If they ran into a civilian, they could be, for lack of better words, undercover. They could be really a North Vietnamese person, somebody who sides with, that wants to, they might be in South Vietnam, but they want to be communist. And you might think that they're your friend, but really they end up being your enemy. Because there's no marks that people put on them to say, hey, look, I'm, communist, I'm non-communist. So people got confused and didn't know who they could trust. And there was a lot of people getting hurt and killed by people that they thought was their friends. Andrea.
My dad's coworker friend, his name is Bong and his brother Dong.
Mhm.
They lived in Vietnam during the war,
Mm-hmm.
and their dad actually helped the United States.
Mm-hmm.
So, like a little bit after the war, they were allowed to leave. The United States helped them leave on a boat to come to.
We have a lot of refugees that came from that area. People that came from, who was our big ally there? That was not in Vietnam. Ooh, it's escaping me at the moment. But we have a lot of people, the Hmong population. They helped the United States. They helped South Vietnam. And when we left, they were left unprotected. And the North Vietnam said, ooh, you were allies with the United States. And they started attacking the Hmong. So we have a large Hmong population that has come over to the United States because it was no longer safe for them in that area.
We
Yes,
have a school right next to us.
do we?
Yeah.
Very cool.
Global Academy.
Oh, I didn't know that a lot of that was mostly Hmong population. Very cool. And that's the case where people who have immigrated, or think about the American Indians, you don't want to lose your heritage. You don't want to lose your culture. So a lot of times we'll have schools that are like Hmong schools where a lot of people go so they can remember their culture and not lose it. Because kids that are at Noble Academy right now, they don't know what it was like to live over in Vietnam because they were born here. But their parents want them to hold on to some of their heritage, hold on to their culture so they don't lose it. So we're going to learn more about the Vietnam War. Thinking they maybe might touch on the Korean War. The Korean War happened
they do.
before the Vietnamese War.
Yeah.
So it's not going to be a big part of the chapter, but it is something that happened. You would learn about when you just do United States history, but this is the Minnesota history, so we're just focusing on stuff that had big impacts in Minnesota.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's just like
Yeah, it's just a brief little touch upon. So let's look at page 365, Cold War warm kitchens. After World War II ended, Minnesotans looked forward to the future. Suburbs grew as people focused on the safety of home. However, another kind of war, the Cold War, developed between nations with different beliefs. The Cold War caused two deadly conflicts, one in Korea and another in Vietnam. learn the story of an Ojibwe Marine who fought in Vietnam, and learn about some federal and state policies of the time. So both Korea and Vietnam had a North and the South, and one was communist fighting the non-communists. So we got involved because we don't want communism to spread. So we didn't want these countries to turn all communists, so we got involved to help the non-communist sides. When World War II ended in 1945, many Minnesotans were looking forward to better times, to peace and prosperity. They dreamed of a post-war world in which they could feel safe and secure. It turned out, however, that another kind of war was just beginning. In many ways, the post-war world was less secure than ever. America's former ally, the Soviet Union, was a communist nation. It was using military force to spread communism to other countries. Communism is based on the belief that the best society is one in which all property is held in common. This system allows everyone to receive an equal share of their nation's goods and wealth. The economic markets are controlled by the government. It sets the prices for all goods and services. So when you hear that, you go, well, that doesn't sound so bad. But like what I was saying, you have to be careful because all of these are being led by humans. And humans sometimes make mistakes. And human leaders sometimes get greedy with the power. And if the government has all the control, that can affect how those leaders will think. They have too much control, too much power. Many Americans, including many Minnesotans, were afraid that communism would spread to the United States. They feared that communism threatened the American ideal of capitalism. This system is based on the belief that the best society is one in which individuals can own property and businesses. This system enables individuals to increase their personal wealth. In a capitalist system, the economic markets operate by free competition between buyers and sellers. The government does not set prices, but it does sometimes regulate or make rules in order to protect the public's best interest. We saw that with, was it James J. Hill that wanted the railroad monopoly?
Yeah.
So, and the government stepped in, he was sued, he was told he cannot monopolize the railroad because it's not in the best interest of everyone else. It's just making him more rich and powerful, but it's not helping others. So in that capitalist society, it's important that we have these regulations. So a small group of people don't become too powerful. Frozen in a deadlock. The Cold War dominated world events for most of the second half of the 20th century. This simmering and dangerous standoff between two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, each feared the other as an enemy that wanted to take over the world. The United States and the Soviet Union had been reluctant allies during World War II, but their alliance did not last. So even when we were allies, we were like, you have different beliefs than us, but we both are opposed to Hitler. We're both opposed to those Axis powers. So we're going to side together, even though we have our differences, because Hitler was so bad. But now that they're done fighting against the Nazis in World War II, now they're seeing, I really can't exist with you. So we need to oppose each other. After the war, the Soviets installed communist governments in many Eastern European countries. Soon, Europe was effectively split in two. On one side stood the United States and its allies in Western Europe and Canada. On the other side stood the Soviet Union and its communist allies in Eastern Europe. Each side sought alliances with other countries and built up armies to protect itself from the other side. By the 1950s, both sides were stockpiling nuclear weapons many times more powerful than the ones dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Several times over the years, the United States and the Soviet Union came close to going to war. Each time, however, they stepped back. Instead, the two Cold War rivals fought each other indirectly by taking part in wars involving smaller, less powerful nations, like Korea and Vietnam. Capitalism and communism were very different economic and political systems. This meant that the United States and the Soviet Union stood on opposing sides. Although they never fought each other directly in a war, the United States and the Soviet Union competed against one another in different ways. They battled for control of the post-war world. Both countries built up strong militaries. Both tried to reach outer space first. Both attempted to convince as many countries as possible that their way of life was superior. In 1949, 4 years after the United States dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan, the Soviet Union exploded its own atomic bomb to test the bomb's abilities. Soon, the Americans and the Soviets were threatening each other with nuclear weapons. They did this even though they knew a nuclear war could destroy the Earth. This standoff between the world's 2 most powerful nations became known as the Cold War. Like most American wars, this conflict played out both overseas and at home. So we're going to see how the Cold War affected how people were living in Minnesota. So with that, we'll say goodbye to our friends at home. We hope you are well and hope to see you soon.